Welcome to Climate Quickies, bite-sized nuggets of climate goodness from our TEDxLondon experts in under 5 minutes.
In this week's Climate Curious, recorded live at TED, we're talking war reporting with TED fellow, TED speaker and war reporter and artist, Anjan Sundaram. Anjan Sundaram spent a decade writing about 21st century dictatorships, forgotten wars and discrimination around the world, from the Democratic Republic of Congo to Rwanda and India. So what made him flip from war reporting to climate reporting? Anjan explains more. Stay curious.
So sometimes when Josie, our producer, and I are at TED, we get really excited about a speaker. And that happened about our guest today, where Josie, our producer, ambushed him after he spoke. And we are so excited to be joined today. So Anjan Sundaram is a TED Fellow, a war reporter, an artist. First of all, welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Maryam.
I'd love it if you could share a bit about what your work focuses on right now, and which was the subject of your TED Talk, which everyone needs to go watch as soon as it comes out.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. And my work focuses, and I'll tell you why, especially because my work focuses on forgotten conflicts. And what I try to do is bring these forgotten conflicts to the mainstream, to the public consciousness, to elevate these in the minds of people around the world. It's a privilege to share the stories of these isolated indigenous communities that I'm reporting on in Mexico. My work now focuses, I've been a war reporter for the last 20 years, mostly in Central Africa, for about 10 years. And recently I've moved to the environmental front lines from the human rights front lines, because I feel like the environmental war is the great war of our time. And I read a report that 54 environmental defenders were killed in Mexico in just 1 year, in 2021. And that kind of moved me and told me, well, if the environmental war is happening around the world, but if Mexico's on the front line, then that's where I want to be. And I want to tell the stories of these communities and how they're protecting ecosystems, mountains, rivers, forests, all the precious ecosystems that we need in order to survive.
Is South America really a hotspot for this? And then is Mexico, like, within that, something that you found as you were deciding to go and focus on this, where you zeroed in?
Absolutely. So at least 1,700 environmental defenders have been killed over the last decade, and nearly 70% of these assassinations happened in Latin America. The three hotspots in Latin America tend to be Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico. And they kind of trade places each year for the deadliest country, unfortunately. And I think, as you said, the killings of these defenders are reported. It's usually a little news story and then it's forgotten.
Exactly.
But they're all connected. There are these little communities of 1,000 people each, and each of them is defending a river, a mountain, a forest, and they're across Latin America and around the world. Outside Latin America, the hotspots tend to be Philippines, India, Kenya. And I should caveat all of this by saying many killings are not reported. So the killings across Africa, given the lack of news media there and the penetration of news from Africa into the world, we don't know. And so all I can say is, given what we know, Latin America is the global front line. It is the hotspot. And because I was looking in from the outside, that's all I had, so that's where I went. And it's shocking, the communities that I'm reporting on in Mexico, their stories aren't told within Mexico.
Wow.
And they're not told in Mexico City. And when I go to these communities, they feel like their fights are hyper-local, for a river, for a mountain, because it's only reported in the local news, in extremely local news, like, the village news or town news. But when I tell them, no, you're part of a global fight.
Right.
There are communities around the world that are allied with you. You're fighting a global war to protect the environment. They understand immediately, because they say Madre Tierra, Mother Earth, is one Earth. And they understand that intuitively. And they're, incredibly excited when I tell them, I'm going to take your stories, forget about Mexico, we're going to skip the middleman and we're going to go international.
Right.
And I'm going to take your stories to as big an audience I can internationally.
So I want to ask you a bit about the impact you hope to have with this. But before we get there, for people who haven't seen your talk yet, it's not out yet, as of today, can you tell us a little bit about what you found when you went there on the ground? And also, this doesn't feel like it's very safe work.
So firstly, I should say these communities are living in war zones. War reporting is never safe, but usually the communities living in a war zone experience far greater risk.
Yes.
Far greater loss. Many of the people I meet die. The next day, next month, next year. That's the nature of
that's
a
the reality.
war.
Yeah.
And in this case, an environmental war. They're dying for a mountain or river. My job as a storyteller is to get to the front line, to experience the war that they're living through, and make their stories immortal.
When you say like we're protecting a mountain, protecting a river, from whom? Like, tell me a bit about that.
Absolutely. So the sites that I travel to that I report on are industrial mega projects. Okay. And I feel like these are the front lines between two modes of living.
So like when you say like mining,
factory complexes, railways,
okay.
dams, green energy projects, wind turbines, anything that's done on an industrial mega project scale. And these projects tend to need a lot of land. They tend to be invasive. They don't tend to communicate with local communities, ask permission, none of that. There tends to be a lot of money involved, a lot of corruption, a lot of profit, and various groups are trying to profit in their own ways. The three groups in Mexico and around the world tend to be governments, companies, both national and international, and organized crime. In Mexico, cartels, but in other places, other kinds of organized crime groups, militias, whatever, in Congo. Everyone's trying to get a piece of the money. And the communities that I'm reporting on tend to be really small, maybe 1,000 people, and they're fighting against a consortium of really powerful and greedy forces. And I feel, to your point about the armed nature of this conflict, I feel like more and more, as the world needs more minerals, more raw materials, even for the green transition, we need lithium, we need titanium, we need metal, we need iron. We're going to need more of these resources, and more of these resources are being found in pristine environments that have been taken care of by indigenous communities for hundreds of years. And so we're now going to the last pristine ecosystems in search of these minerals, believing we're doing good. We want to transition to a green economy, but the method in which we extract these minerals is still the same old colonial processes and very violent processes, especially when the communities refuse. So that hunger, I feel, is going to drive the armed nature of environmental defense even higher. I feel like natural reserves are no longer, we can't take for granted that they're going to be protected. Sooner or later, these capitalist industrial forces that are seeking raw materials are going to come and find them. And then someone is going to need to defend them. And I feel like, they're going to have to take up arms, because how do you defend against such powerful forces?
Absolutely. And you mentioned about how kind of remote or isolated and localized these conflicts are. I assume that these groups, they get no support from outside of their own community. How are they doing this?
They're very entrepreneurial. They have a history of resistance, of revolution, of armed struggle against Spanish conquistadores that came in 500 years ago, then wealthy landowners, descendants of Spanish colonizers, and now cartels. They have a very tight-knit social fabric. They're connected to their land. They feel the land is them. They're willing, it's remarkable, they don't just talk about our connection to nature. They're willing to put their bodies on the front line, their children on the front line, because it's their whole culture, it's their way of being. This
might be a very naive question to ask, or even especially in that way, but are they winning?
So I think as a society, there are hope. And I think, personally, I don't have the macro view around the world to answer that question authoritatively. But what I can say is, in the fight for nature, in the fight to preserve nature or extract from nature and destroy nature, in this war for the environment, I do believe that they are our hope. And as a society, if we want to preserve nature, we have to support them, ally ourselves with them, join forces. Otherwise, we're not going to win. We're going to lose our last pristine ecosystems. And that's just a reality.
As you've been doing this work, what has surprised you?
One of the main reasons why these communities aren't reported on, and this war isn't reported on, is there is a legacy of historical racism. There is a legacy of colonialism. There is a legacy of classism. I think the environmental war has brought it home, and we need to do it for us. And if we don't do it for us, if we don't do this, our planet is going to be destroyed. And these are the people who are protecting it. So I think the question is really up to our society. And I feel like the crisis can sometimes lead to a tipping point and people change their attitudes. And it's a hope, but it's a hope that I've pinned my work on.
I'm so grateful for you taking the time to share all of this with us. If other people are feeling like me and they want to know more, where do they find your work?
It's on my website, anjansundaram.com.
Thank you for talking to me and for this work and for being so generous and for these communities being so open to having their stories shared.
Thank you, Maryam. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for listening to this quickie.
This episode was created by our superstar podcast team at TEDxLondon. Until next time,
Stay curious.